lot of people don't like Al when they first meet him because he's like kind of scary looking, you know. I know my family was like, this is the guy you're going to marry, you know. But then once you get to know Al, like who's more lovable, you know, than Al, and funny, and, you know.
You bring me to one of my most favorite quotes I've read. When Al and you met face to face, you were smoking. And he said, do you smoke? And you went, not anymore.
Not anymore. Yeah.
That is, you could put that in a movie and people would think it was like too on the nose. That is one of the most incredibly witty things you could have done.
It's true love. Hello, welcome. It's HardLore time. How you doing, Bo?
I'm doing so good. I'm very excited for today's episode.
This is a big day. I've wanted to do this. We've wanted to do this for a couple years now, whether Nancy knows it or not. But we are honored today to be joined by award-winning author of I'm Not Holding Your Coat, OG punk rocker. Whether she knows it or not, she's the godmother of straight edge. And the wife of the late, great Al Barile of SSD, Nancy Barile.
Thanks for having me.
They're screaming at home. How are you?
Good, thanks. Yeah, you know, I'm doing okay, holding up okay.
Okay, great.
All things considered.
You saw Hocus Pocus today?
Yeah, so my building, we moved over here. Well, we were supposed to move over here to be closer to Dana-Farber for Al's cancer treatment in this, kind of bougie apartment building. And they're always having these special events, where they make all this food and they, we watch a football game or we, play games or we're learning to cook or something. And so I take full advantage of everything. So, and I have fun. And I met a lot of people, a lot of really cool people. I met a kid that likes punk and we've been going to shows together. And, I'm like, do your friends know he's 35. And I'm like, do your friends know you're hanging out with a 66-year-old?
Well, if they knew the exploits of that
Exactly.
66-year-old, they'd be kissing his feet.
Yeah, I took him to Turnstile with backstage passes and we watched it from the stage. So he had a great time, I think.
I love to hear it.
That is amazing.
It's interesting that I can hear both the Philly and the Boston in your accent.
I managed to get the worst of both, a hybrid, it's awful. I can't stand when these come out, I can never listen to them because my accent is it's like the worst from both accents.
No, Europeans are going to be studying this for some movie later, figuring out how do I merge these two insane geographic regions. Until I opened your book, I always in my mind associated with you with Boston. I didn't know how much of your punk history was Philly. You were such a Philly chick.
Yeah, that was my thing. And when that book came out, everyone's, some people were like, oh, it's about Boston, or, some dudes born in the 90s were like, oh, you're riding the coattails of your husband. I'm like, this is my story. My book ends when I moved to Boston. So
you don't come in till chapter 12.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So how does this young Catholic high school girl in Philly discover punk in its earliest incarnation?
Yeah, so my dad was a Marine and I went to Catholic school, so I was definitely looking for something, and that was live music. So when I was about 15, a sophomore in high school, I had a boyfriend who was a senior and had a car, and we started going to concerts. And I was just so hooked on live music. I just loved live music. And I would go see, anybody. I was still kind of honing my taste and figuring out who I liked. So, there was some Blue Oyster Cult in there and some Manfred Mann's Earth Band, but by 1976, 1977, I think I would say seeing Iggy Pop with Blondie opening was really the door that led me right into punk. And then
David Bowie on keys, right?
And David
For Iggy
Bowie on
Pop?
keys. That's why I went, because
So cool.
Bowie was on keys, and I had bought The Idiot, and I thought it was like a really creepy, cool sounding record. It was different than anything else I ever listened to, and so we had front row seats, and it was
Oh, that was seated.
yeah. It was
Wow.
at the Tower Theater. Yeah, it was at the Tower Theater. So we had front row seats.
Wow.
I got a smooch from Iggy, which I was all excited about because I was like 16, and it was. and then
You mentioned that everybody, like so many of your peers, refer to you as Blondie.
Yeah, well, that's
off
what.
the cuff.
Yeah, and that was, let's face it. If you were a girl with blonde hair in the punk scene back then, you wanted to be Debbie. I mean, who wouldn't want to be Debbie Harry?
I want to be
I want to be Debbie.
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly. And so that was a huge compliment to me. And then when I moved to Philadelphia when I was 19, and you're walking around and everything, like that's what guys would roll down the window and be like, "Hey, Blondie,"
Yeah, sure.
That was the thing. And I had no problem with that.
Once you see Debbie Harry, it's like, I'm
yeah,
Blondie now.
that's
I
fine. If
am.
you want to, that's great. That's the highest compliment to me. And so it wasn't long after seeing Iggy that I saw the Ramones at University of Pennsylvania. And then, I was just all in after that. And so
I have some. I want to know more details about that show a little later. I've got it kind of chronological here, but
Sure.
I really there's an anecdote you said that I really liked about hearing House of the Rising Sun.
oh yeah, when I was a little kid, right?
And then having this feeling in the back of your mind of wanting something more dangerous. Like hearing that and being like, I shouldn't be hearing this. What's more dangerous out there, and why do I want it? Why am I attracted to it?
Yeah, like I remember that record came out when I was 5 years old, and I just loved it. I thought it was great. But back then, like if you didn't have the 45, you could only hear it on the radio.
Right.
So, we would drive around, my mother, in the car, and whenever that song came on, she always changed it. So I knew that there was something a little dark and a little, and then we always watched Ed Sullivan on Sunday nights. And, I remember seeing the Beatles, and, I like the Beatles. I had, some of their 45s, but when the Stones came on Ed Sullivan, I knew right away there's something a little more dangerous,
edgier,
a little
yeah.
sensual about them. And I was like, a little kid, but I definitely knew. And so I definitely gravitated towards the harder, darker side of music from a really young age. And I'm sure that was, the rebellion because of my dad and Catholic school and all the oppression.
And this was the Animals, right?
Yes.
We're big champions of the animals.
We're big
here
Animals
on the
guys.
show.
Oh my God. I still search them up on YouTube and watch, because you don't expect that voice to come out of that man,
Of just
like
this sexy guy.
Who's
Why
a
does he
little
look
like
like that?
It's just, he just, he looks like a kid, and, he's got this amazing voice, and it just, I always got like a shiver response to music. And that's how I know that, that something's good, because I just get goosebumps. And so.
Can you tell me about your first tattoo in 1981?
Oh my gosh. So, tattoos, the guys that I hung around with wanted tattoos. And so I went with them a couple of times. And you know how it is. You go with somebody, then you want one too, right?
Sitting in a tattoo shop not getting tattooed is one of the worst things.
Exactly. And so first I got an Anarchy A on my shoulder. Because like that was the punk rock thing to do, I wasn't.
You accredited that to being a big Discharge head.
Yes. Well, then I went back and I got Fight Back written around it. So those were two separate things, because I freaking love Discharge.
And that's like a new band at the time.
They were a new band at the time, and they were amazing. Boy, I legit wore that record out. Like I had to buy another copy.
Oh, wow.
Because I loved it so much. And so, so then I had Fight Back on it. And then one of my friends like got my initial on his arm. So like I got like a little heart or something, and no girls had tattoos back then, unless you were kind of a certain bikery kind of thing.
Sure.
So my mother was pissed when she found. I remember her taking a tissue out of her purse and wetting it and trying to wash it off. She was like, that better not be real. That better not be real, So, and I had it for, and Al hated tattoos too. He was, he almost got a Van Halen tattoo one time, but
he can't cover up them guns.
No.
Yeah. So he didn't like tattoos. And so maybe like 1986 or so, I just got sick of it. It was like wearing the same t-shirt all the time. So I wanted to get it taken off. Okay. And at the time, they didn't have laser surgery or anything, so they had to cut it out. Oh. And then I had my arm in this thing where, and then they would, wind it down till my skin grew back.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I had this big scar, and, I used to tell people,
Do you still like discharge?
Yes, I love discharge. Okay. Yeah. And so, and the scar eventually, kind of faded away, but sure. I used to tell people that I get bit by a shark and make up stories all the time to say.
Well, the truth is out there now. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So that's, and it's funny. So when the Polish version of my book came out, they put that tattoo on the cover.
Really?
A picture of it that Gail Rush had taken. And, they had, our deal was they could pick what they wanted. So.
Okay. Wow.
What are you going to do?
That tattoo is out there. Oh, it's so embarrassing. But what are you going to, I know people that, they have 40-year-old kids from their mistakes when they were 16 or,
sure. A tattoo and a scar.
A tattoo is probably
photo
not.
of a tattoo.
Yeah. So it's not, I don't regret it, but.
Speaking of 40-year-old mistake, my mother also had a similar story as you with House of the Rising Sun with Riders on the Storm.
Oh, yeah, that was another one. I remember when that came out, that had a very distinct vibe, when you get those chills when you hear a song for the first time. There's a couple of them, Cat People, David Bowie, Heroes, David Bowie is like that. Alice Cooper Elected was like that with me, There's a bunch of songs, when I just heard them, I just got, they just, I don't know, man. Music is just so powerful for me. And to this day.
We just got done talking about it.
Colin said those exact words about 24 hours ago.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
So when you had this feeling, how did you find more? You saw the Ramones, you knew you were in. Where does the journey continue from there? And
so then, back then we would buy the magazines. And so that was Cream and Circus and Hit Parader and those, and I would read, Patti Smith, Mm-hmm. Now if I write about Patti Smith in a punk group, people are like, she's not punk rock, and I'm like, she was the punkest shit out there, man. When I was a kid, there was nobody more punk than Patti, and I love Patti. I love Patti so much that I met her mother at a show and we became pen pals and used to write weekly to each other.
Wow, no kidding.
Yeah, she was really cool. And so I discovered a lot of bands through the magazine. Then I went to school in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which was dead man's land. There was just nothing out there. If there was live music, I didn't know where it was. And, it was the disco era. And, not gonna lie, love my disco,
cool.
And I love
tracks.
And I love to dance and stuff. So, I had a fake, back then, your IDs didn't have your picture on it. I had I worked at McDonald's and somebody left a New Jersey ID in there. And so, I snatched it up. And as long as you knew your birth date and your birth sign, you could get anywhere. So, I would go disco dancing and stuff. Wow. And, I love my Sylvester and Cheryl Lynn and Evelyn Champagne King and stuff, that. I still like all that stuff, when I
Nancy, a lot of McDonald's talk in your book.
Well,
was this the place to be or what?
In my, I used to tell my students, my McDonald's was like Arnold's, which of course they don't know that reference because they don't, they only see Happy Days if they watch reruns.
Sure. Oh,
gotcha. So, but if there was a fight, it happened at my McDonald's. If there was a hookup, it happened at my McDonald's. If there was, everything happened at my McDonald's, and I worked there. So, I got to experience it all, and, back then, you just had a cash register. There were no cameras or anything. All my friends, my family, everybody ate for free. And so.
And Nancy, have you ever been to the McDonald's across the street from the Middle East in Cambridge?
Yeah, maybe years ago I probably was, sure.
It's a good one.
It's still like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like that,
happens.
A lot happening there. Yeah. I mean, it was, my McDonald's was crazy. There used to be, one time somebody set the back of the store on fire, and somebody said, the back of your store's on fire, so I go running out the back door, and it singed my eyelashes, my eyebrows, my hair.
Oh my God.
But they did it because somebody, while we were all doing that, somebody came in and robbed us.
Wow,
well, it was
genius.
it was a smart little ploy. And
Ocean's 1.
I remember that was one of my first experiences with the police, because we all had to go down and, take like lie detector tests, whether, we were part of it and everything. I remember my mom went with me, and they were like, "Did you take the money, Nancy?" I was like, "No."
Wow. There's something so Forrest Gumpian about you, Nancy.
Yeah, it's so funny. One of my friends from Harrisburg, from my very first college, I hadn't seen her in 36 years, and she came up and visited me for 4 days this past weekend, and I was, telling her different stories and stuff, and she was like, "You're like the Forrest Gump of
Yeah.
just right place at the right time a lot of times."
Here's something cool that I think Bo's going to appreciate. So in Catholic school, you have there's a sister who's there for half a year.
I hate her.
Who really broadened your mind.
Oh, that was in high school. Yeah.
And one of the things that was really effective was her showing you Tommy by the Who.
Yeah, wow. Imagine that, right? So, I'm in Catholic school from 1st to 8th grade, and I get this nun in 9th grade. And she was so cool. She taught us Psycho, The Exorcist, and Tommy, and she used that all as a platform to teach us about religion. And honest to God, it was like the first time anything ever like connected with me about religion, and it took the Who's Tommy to do it, I guess.
Especially the Christ figure that Roger Daltrey plays by the end, and all the sunglasses, earplugs, mouth plug thing, all that stuff for sure. That, when I brought up my mom earlier, and why Colin mentioned that I would appreciate that, is my mom is obsessed with the Who. That's like her band. Wow. So my whole life, they've been kind of that figure for me. And I love Tommy. And I don't, I have a very secular outlook on life as well. And I was kind of raised in, I didn't go to a Catholic school or anything like that like you, but I was raised in a similar kind of upbringing with my dad. And I wonder if that connected to me in the same way when I was like,
probably
this
did.
is a cult. This is Tommy. This is the same thing, Tommy's holiday camp,
Right now, my new apartment is right across the street from Fenway Park, and the school resource officer at my high school where I taught, I'm retired now, but he was like, he was a punk rock kid, Wow. And there wasn't a lot of punk rock kids in my school. Most of my kids like hip hop or world music, but Joe Singer, he really, he liked punk and hardcore, and he called me up the day of the Who played Fenway, and he's like,
"That's right.
Do you know anybody that would want to go to?" And I was like, "Oh hell yeah, me right here, I'm going." Yeah. So I called my one of my girlfriends, and I was like, "You want to go see the Who?" And she was like, "Hell yeah!" And so we went, and like we had great seats, and we just had the best time. And
amazing.
They were not super high energy, but I still really enjoyed it. They were my brother's favorite band growing up. So
there you go.
Speaking of teaching, you said, I love this very simple quote, "In my classroom, punk rock lives."
Yeah, it really does. And
can you tell me about connecting with students?
Yeah,
I'm sure it was reluctant at first, but over time realizing it's such a huge avenue to relate to these kids who maybe don't have many adults in their life who understand this aspect of their life.
Right, and that's actually my next book that'll come out next year. It's Adventures of a Punk Rock Teacher, and it's about how I used punk rock to reach my kids, because I didn't look like my students, and I was much older than, when I started teaching, I was 37. I wasn't like right out of college, So my first year, I had a lot of Cambodian gang members in my class, kids that moved here. Their families came over. They settled mostly in Long Beach, and then they came over to, Massachusetts and into my gateway community, and they weren't exactly welcomed by the people that lived here at that time. Their houses were burned down and their property was damaged. And so they formed gangs for protection. And so, I really didn't know too much about gangs. My gang experience was, West Side Story and Dangerous Minds and getting the Ghetto Riders to help us out in Buff Hall and Cambridge. And
Great chapters. We'll talk about.
Yeah. And so, I certainly couldn't relate to their experiences with racism and that kind of marginalization. But as a teenager who often felt like other and, not really respected by the community and everything, I just kind of tapped into that with those kids. And, it was insane. I lost a student my first year to gun violence. Oh, wow. And I really didn't know what I was doing. I had zero cultural competency. They didn't really teach that in school, but the kids helped me. The kids taught me as much as I taught them. And that was, really valuable. And so I just kind of used what I learned through punk rock to help reach these kids. And it worked, to a certain extent. And certainly, the whole do-it-yourself attitude that you need for punk rock was so valuable to me as a teacher, because I taught in an economically disadvantaged school. So if I wanted anything other than the bare bones curriculum or experience, I had to get it myself. So like I took my kids to New York for all expense paid 3 times. I used to bring in guest speakers. I got extra books, and that was all punk rock.
Yeah, that's the dream.
Yeah, trying to get that stuff, and so it really helped me a lot. Wow. If I didn't have that experience, I don't think I would have made it. And it helped me, I like to think that maybe I helped some kids, go down a different path, by showing them like there's other ways to be successful. And, part of the book is sad, but sort of part of it is triumphant as well. So,
I just like your teacher who you had, who showed you Psycho Exorcist Tommy, just like I've related experiences like that. I guarantee you have touched students who have been looking for exactly your touch in that way.
I
There's
hope
no
so.
doubt in my mind.
It's funny, the people that come and visit me here at my apartment are all former students,
That's beautiful.
Like,
yeah,
I got
awesome.
a call, like, hey, Barile, we're at the Red Sox game, are you home? We're going to come over and visit you, I'll be like, come on over,
I don't have that relationship with any teacher.
No.
I had some I liked, but I'm not calling them.
Yeah. No, my kids, they were, they're great, and they're fun and they're funny, and, they helped me get through it. And when Al passed away, they were just unbelievable to me. They would, they'd do anything for me. And those gang kids, to this day, if I called them up and I said, I need $20,000 and a ride to Florida, they would be there. They'd say, what time you want me to pick you up? They would be there. Like they were so good to me,
Wow.
and to this day, they're so good to me.
Wow.
Incredible.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You and Al were very kind of famously liberal people.
Yes.
A lifetime of subscribing
Just a little bit.
anti-fascist, anti-racist, anti-homophobic ideals, which very much align with the entire idea of punk to me, and I know to you, Nancy.
Yeah, and it just blows my mind when I see these, old punk rockers out there like, touting MAGA and all this nonsense. I just
how is it possible?
It seems like it happens to all of them,
I don't know, but it really drives me crazy. And Al and I, we were both, we were just both so crazy about it. I still am, I still, go off on my rant. I still march at all the marches, and I try to, I try not to rant too much on social media, but most of the time I can't stop myself. And, I got an email from a kid just recently that, maybe graduated 7-8 years ago. And he said, that he found what I said important, and that he had my back on anything that, and that I helped him understand, and that made me really happy. He was, that my kids are listening, and so
I got to tell you, I think a big part of, I'm absolutely entranced by everything that you're saying right now. And I think a big part of that is because you've stayed young in your mind and in your mindset, and you've stayed so attached to youth-based cultures that you're really blowing my mind right now with just how you're able to use your life experiences and to keep up with what is going on today. And even from, following your social media, you post, I read every single post that you like. Every letter.
This podcast episode is happening.
Yes.
Well, obviously we've wanted to do this for quite some time, but you posted a random video of the Misfits the other day, which we'll talk about in a second.
Yeah.
And we were just like, God, she's awesome.
Yeah.
Let's talk.
Thank you. That makes me feel happy, because sometimes when I post in like Facebook groups, man, like I just get like, and I don't know if you've ever seen them, because sometimes they're so funny. I just screenshot them and like the guy who explained straight edge to me, and then at the end he said, "Now you know."
Oh my God.
And then one guy told me, "I think that you went to ska shows in the Midwest that you thought were hardcore shows."
Oh my God.
And, I get a lot of mansplaining, and it just drives me nuts. And then some guys are like really nasty, like they can be really horrible.
People come out of the woodwork to get your back and be like, "You don't know who you're talking to."
But it's mostly women. I'd like to see, there's a few guys, there's a guy, Jan from Germany. He jumps in and rips them up. I love Jan of Light.
There's going to be more now. There's going to be a lot more now.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you look at you as a teacher and as an ideal, your ideals that you post about are so important today, because you look at like the people that are exposed to young men on a daily basis are people like Charlie Kirk,
right? Andrew
Tate, all these streamers who are all like kind of subconsciously promoting weird right-wing ideals.
Absolutely, and it kills me.
It's insane, and it's important to have other voices out there who are logical.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a big disappointment to me when I found out that some of my students listened to that, Andrew Tate guy especially. I was like, what are you doing? You're smarter than that,
The Ramones at the University of Pennsylvania.
Yes, the Ramones at the
Walk me through it.
So, okay, so I went to see Nils Lofgren. I loved Nils Lofgren when I was 16. Don't ask, I just thought he was an amazing guitarist. Okay. Mick Ronson and Nils Lofgren. And so Nils Lofgren played at Montgomery County Community College, which was right down the street from my house. So I was like so pumped. So I went, and there was a photographer there, and he told Nils that, there's this girl that loves you, and he came out and met me, and then the photographer took pictures. Long story short, at the end of the night, the photographer said, "I have tickets to see the Ramones at University of Penn if you want to go." And so my sister had just gotten her license, and she was not a good driver at the time. Nice. But together, and my dad was strict, so we had to, I don't know where we told him we were going,
church,
a church dance or something, Yeah. But we went down to University of Penn, and we saw the Ramones, and they were just like, you could be right up front. It was so easy to be right up front. Yeah. And I remember,
because of the audience lack of audience density, or
and just because we're fearless. You didn't, I was up front for everything. I didn't care,
were people like push moshing or pogoing, or was there stage diving?
Yeah, maybe like a little slammy pogoing kind of thing,
It's a
that
little
was
rumpus,
fun.
Love it.
Yeah, and it was fun. And then I remember Joey Ramone was talking to me on the steps, and he said he liked to stand with like one foot on one step and then another, because I think he had like a back issue or something,
In 81?
Yeah, but I think he had like scoliosis or something.
He had issues for sure.
Yeah. Wow. And I just remember he had like a really thick accent, and it was hard for me to understand him.
Like hey, New York.
And I was.
I would hope so.
Yeah, and I was like a suburban kid, so I didn't know, but I was like, I was enthralled, I just was like, wow, this is so cool.
And did that appeal to you right away? The fact
right
that
away.
just the fact that you could talk to someone like that.
Absolutely.
Like you could, yeah.
Yeah, so many of the shows that I saw were like at the Spectrum or JFK Stadium or Tower Theater, and I was too young for nightclubs, so being at a show where somebody came out and talked to you, I was like starstruck. That was so cool to me. And then once I moved into the city when I was 19, and then went to the Hot Club and places like that. Well, then everybody, all the bands were outside smoking cigarettes outside, and you could just walk up to them and talk to them, and it was like, oh man, I thought that was just so cool.
It is cool. We talk about that all the time. That's one of the beautiful things about punk rock and hardcore and metal to this day. Underground music, let's say, that everybody's just people.
Yeah,
it's kind of the only genre where that regularly happens.
Right. I think in my book I talk about when I went to see Joan Jett at Emerald City in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And this guy I had on I don't know, some kind of crazy latex spandex pants and like a bumblebee sweater or something. Thank God we didn't have cameras as much
there's some pictures in that book.
Yeah, there are some pictures, but not that.
But they're all cool. I can tell
not
you
that particular
cool
outfit. Thank God. and this guy came up to me and said like cool pants. We ended up talking, and it turned out then after a while he was like, well, I got to go, and I was like, oh, he's leaving me, But it turned out he was Joan Jett's guitarist, and he had to be on stage.
Oh yeah,
pretty cool.
Yeah, and so then he ended up coming and visiting me in Philly and stuff. He was a really, really nice guy. We're still friends to this day.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about it. You saw the Misfits in '81.
I did.
You went up to the city. You stayed at the Chelsea Hotel.
I did.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I went up with Ricky Ercole, who's great photographer, and Johnny Vukic, who was another cool dude, and Robbie from the Sadistic Exploits, and we stayed at the Chelsea Hotel. I remember us getting our picture taken in front of like Sid and Nancy's room, and
that was cool to you in 1981.
That was very cool to me in 1982. Yeah.
Because when did Nancy die? It was like 79 or something.
Yeah, 79. Yeah, Sid died in 79, so she was like right before that. Yeah,
wow,
yeah.
Okay.
And of course, we didn't. I still don't know if Sid really killed her. I don't know. It was just they were just
seems like a pretty rough guy.
Yeah,
I know this isn't. It's not like a great movie, but have you seen Sid and Nancy, the very old movie?
Absolutely, yeah. I wanted to be in that movie.
I could see that. For you.
I wanted.
My name is in it.
Yeah. I wanted to be. I think I sent. Forget the guy's name. I think his first name is Alex, and I think I sent him a letter saying like, "Pick me for this movie."
Yeah. The way they kind of showed how she dies in that is actually, I think, kind of the most plausible.
Yeah,
probably the best part of the movie. I would say
one of them. Yeah, I don't know. Gary Oldman's so good in it.
He's so good, and she's great too.
Yeah,
Chloe,
great
whatever
too.
her name is, she was fabulous too. Yeah, that was a great movie. I saw it in the theater a couple of times, I think. And so, but the Chelsea Hotel was just so incredibly nasty. I mean, I'm talking cockroaches everywhere. Like you can go to the bathroom, they were crawling on you. It was like disgusting. It was like one of those Hoarders episodes. TV shows,
Yeah.
And then we went to Chase Park where the where the Misfits played. And back then it was really uncool to like the Misfits,
Yeah, that blew my mind.
Please explain. Please.
And so they only and this is my memory. So, that they got gigs around Halloween usually, although we saw them in I think it was August. But that's, they played and, the Undead and they were like horror bands and like everybody else was kind of, I think, stripped down, jeans, t-shirt, leather jacket kind of thing. And, they were still makeup,
Which in post glam world was maybe
it was not
what made them uncool.
I don't know, I think so, but I was blown away by them, and I just remember there were cockroaches all over Chase Park too. I remember I had a drink and like there was a cockroach on it, and it was like, let me get back to my Philadelphia apartment where the cockroaches stay in the hallways.
They're your neighbors.
Exactly. Like I don't have to worry about them. But
that video you posted, How does he sound so good?
Yeah, I mean, and the sound that night was so horrible. That was a bad night sound. But like, I think Glenn always really liked playing Philly. Like, that's one of the only times I've ever seen him dive into an audience.
Same.
Yeah, what the hell?
Same.
Yeah, and I told you he broke the lock on the door and let all the little young kids in and stuff. He was really cool and nice to the people in Philly. Because sometimes I think he could be a little. But I love the Misfits. I saw them a bunch of times, and they were always entertaining. Even when they weren't precision, they were entertaining.
Yeah.
You would hope so. You would soon after that start managing the Sadistic exploits.
Yeah. So which
ends up being a huge part of your life.
It really was. I wanted to be a contributor, and I remember trying it. My brother had a bass guitar, and I tried to learn how to play, and I just had zero talent. I had no musical talent. I couldn't sing. I couldn't play an instrument. So I realized if I wanted to be a contributor, I was going to have to be in the infrastructure. And so with the band, we decided we wanted to bring all ages shows to the kids, and there was nothing like that really. There was one group called the Swingers, a bunch of young kids that had done Bauhaus at the Elk Center, and boy, I remember going in there just thinking that was so creepy and cool and weird. So when we decided we wanted to do an all ages show, we were like, let's do the Elks. And so we just got 4 local bands and charged $5, and we just papered the city with, so much wheat paste. Remember, wheat paste is getting your hair and your face and everything. It was just awful. And, put them up in every record store. And we really, our publicity machine was hardcore. Wow. And we didn't know my little brother was working the door because he had a money belt, and we were not in a good neighborhood. And so we weren't sure whether anybody would show up. We thought we knew the 40 or 50 punks in Jersey, Philly area. And I remember, the night of the show, looking down, there was just like a line down the block. And we were like, oh my God. And it was just amazing. It was probably one of the... You're a
better manager from that one night than many managers I've seen.
One of the happiest days of my life. And I remember, the guys at the end of the night, like, had me come out, and like I had never even spoken into a microphone before. I didn't know what I was doing, to thank the crowd. It was just, it was mind blowing. So then I knew I wanted to do more shows, even though they were wicked stressful.
Sure,
because there's so much that could go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, you said you were pestering Hilly to book at CBGB.
Yeah. Oh, I called him every day. He'd be like, call me tomorrow. And I'd be like, the next day I'd call on the phone. Hi, it's Nancy. Then finally gave us a show on like a Tuesday night or something,
What can you do?
And they, the band did pretty well. And I don't even know how we got, because we didn't have a van or anything like that. I think somebody had a station wagon maybe, or we borrowed, we played with the Mob a lot. Those guys were so nice. And, borrowed equipment or whatever, But then we started going up to New York all the time, and that's fun. And then I got to meet like Jimmy G and John Watson and Chris Cherokee and guys from The Young and the Useless, and even Harley. And
Harley, there's a photo of you and a young Harley Flanagan.
My little baby Harley.
It's just like every older punk has this same photo with the young Harley.
Joe Strummer.
Yeah, he was, I remember, kind of worrying about him, because he was so young, but he was so cool, and he was such a good drummer. I saw him play Philly with the Stimulators, and I was just like, damn, this kid is good, And
was he as much of just a little fucker?
I remember like him and those, young and useless guys just like be throwing ice cubes down my shirt and stuff, like they were just, they were kids, but they were fun and they were nice, and Harley and I are still friends to this day. We had a little, there was, the whole New York, Boston thing came out, and but Al and I were out of hardcore by like 1985. Al sold all his equipment, and we bought a jet ski.
That's right.
Yeah, like a stand-up, the stand-up Kawasaki one that you had to pay your dues on the ride.
I mean, come on, man, good trade.
Exactly. It was one of my proudest accomplishments. There weren't a lot of women that rode them at the time, and I was like, felt so badass that I knew how to ride one. And so we did that for a lot of years, and social media came in, and I remember Tony Rettman was one of the first people to interview me about, like, I think about Buff Hall or something. And then he asked me about the Harley thing, and he was like, oh yeah, there's this. And I was like, I don't know anything about that, because when SSD always went to New York, they got huge crowds. There was like, a lot of love in the air for SSD. There was one night they played at the Rock Hotel, and there was a show earlier in the day at CBGBs with the FUs. And there was like some kind of a fake band called the Fuck Ups, or I don't know what they were called, but like they said some incendiary things that pissed New York off. Uh-huh. And then those people came to this show, and there was some Boston crew kids who were drunk that night. And so there was like a couple scuffles in the audience, where, one of the guys got his shirt ripped. But that was it, and I found out literally decades later that Jonathan Anastas from DYS got punched in the face, but I was from Philly, and I said this before in interviews, like if somebody didn't throw a bomb at you and you didn't get hit 77 stitches in your head with a lead pipe, or the cops didn't throw you in jail, like it was a good evening, So a punch in the face, shake that shit off,
It happens.
So I didn't really see that as anything, but I remember Tony saying, well, in Harley's book, he talks about somebody punching Al in the face. I was like, what? Like we had no idea, and Jamie and Crick, we had no idea about all that stuff that went down,
They'd be lying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then afterwards, Harley and I talked, and, it was just kind of like, I remember John Joseph was one of my students contacted me, and he's like, oh, John Joseph's in this podcast saying that he laid Al out. And I was like, no, that never happened. I asked Al, I go, John Joseph never laid you out, did he? He said, no. And Al would say, like, Al took some, not so much in punk rock, but in his pre-punk rock world, was a scrapper, and
I've seen those arms.
Yeah, and he got, but he was in some, 10-on-1, him being one fights where he did get hurt, and so he wasn't, ashamed to say if he did, but John Joseph backed right down after we called him out on it. So
saying stuff.
It's interesting too, because there's the Judge song about New York.
I just found out about that.
Boston came around one night, pushed him to shove, we were down to fight, and then Harley, there's a quote of Harley saying, I was there that night, and the Judge guys weren't there. So you don't know, who to listen to, what's happening.
So
I'm listening to Nancy, though, I'll tell you what. Yeah.
I went to Judge just recently, and that's the first time I ever saw
the
Judge.
Unction. You went to the Unction?
I went to that. I went to that show at the Middle East. It was Integrity, Earth Crisis, and Judge,
The Unction.
And I remember listening to Mike's interview with Drew Stone, and I thought that was one of the best I ever heard. I think I listened to it like twice. Wow. I thought that kid had a pretty amazing life. So I wanted to see him and Matt Pincus, who he's Trust Records, and Joe Nelson was in town, and so I was talking to Mike, and he was like, telling me about this lyric, which I think like maybe a couple of times when I put stuff up, like people put that lyric, but like I didn't know what it was, and then he told me about it, and he said, it was not intended, he told me, to be like any kind of, slag on SSD or any of maybe like the first wave of hardcore,
Sure.
I forget how he told me. He said it was guys in like, I forget, he told me like they had some distinctive Boston guys like clothing, I can't remember, or hats or something, and I was like, I don't, but like we didn't know any of that stuff until decades later. As far as we were concerned, New York was second home, and I mean, there's not two nicer guys than Chris Foley and Jamie Sharappa, why would you not like them, and I can see why a lot of people don't like Al when they first meet him, because he's like kind of scary looking, I know my family was like, this is the guy you're going to marry, but then once you get to know Al, like who's more lovable, than Al, and funny, and,
You bring me to one of my most favorite quotes I've read. We might be cutting ahead a little bit. It's okay, but I got to talk about it now. When Al and you met face to face, you were smoking, and he said, "Do you smoke?" And you went, "Not anymore."
Not anymore. Yeah.
That is You could put that in a movie and people would think it was like too on the nose. That is one of the most incredibly witty things you could have done.
It's true love.
It was true love. I mean, I talked to Al on the phone first for 4 hours. I think I fell in love with him right then, and I wasn't even sure which dude I was talking to,
You didn't know it was the incredibly jacked.
No, I had bought the record and it said SSD Control wants to play your city, and there was a number, and I was doing shows, and so I called them to do a show, and he couldn't do the show that I wanted him to do, but we ended up talking for 4 hours, which was really expensive back then. Then after I got off the phone, and he had invited me to the DKs the next weekend in Staten Island. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I was going to get there. I pulled out the album and I saw his picture. I was like, ooh, he looked a little scary,
So it's a full-on Love Is Blind situation.
Yeah, I just, and then once I met him in Staten Island, I was like, I really like this dude. But then I still thought Boston was too far away, and I was trying to fight it a little bit. And then he called me in like August and said that MDC was playing in New York City. Was I going? And I said, yeah, I'm going, and so then we met there, and then that was it. I was, head over heels in love. I was
you called the chapter I Meet My Match.
I met my match. Yeah, he was he was really, he's just so different. The Al is definitely probably on the autism spectrum, and I'm saying that as a person with a behavioral science degree who worked in education. He was never diagnosed, but he's definitely, he's just different, and it's what made him a good engineer, because he doesn't think like everybody else. So if there was a problem, everybody saw a solution one way, but his brain thought different. He'd be like, well, how about this, And Joe Nelson said that too from Trust Records. He said, Al asked me questions that I never thought, I never even thought were questions, And when they were making, when they were remastering the record and stuff, Joe, Al's incapable of lying. He cannot lie. And so that's a good thing and it's a bad thing.
Of course, yes, of course.
Because sometimes he has no filter, and some when he'd go down with my parents, and my mom would be like, "Do you like my lasagna, Al?" And he would be like, "It's not as good as my father's," I'm like, shut up, that's not what you're supposed to say, But I remember one time Joe Nelson had given him like a mix of the Kids Will Have Their Say, and Al was just going off on him, saying how bad it was. This sucks. And this is horrible. And I was like, Al, you can't, tone it down. He's like, why? It is. It's horrible.
Sounds like my brother. Sounds like very familiar to me.
And so then, Joe was doing all kinds of different versions. And then he was like, well, I'll sneak something in the middle here. And then Al was like, I know exactly what you're doing. So,
he's good, man.
He was just really funny. He was absolutely the most brilliant man I ever met. He just was so crazy smart in a way that I couldn't even,
I mean, you'd spent a decade, meeting and bumping elbows with
everybody,
all these legendary punk rockers, but Al's the one that.
Al was the one.
Al's the one that got you.
Yeah, he just, he was just really different. I liked the whole hockey thing too. I always thought hockey players were different. They were, they're. You got soccer players flopping on the field when you touch them, and you got hockey players playing a whole period with a broken leg, Right. And Al had his teeth were knocked out from, wow. I just found all of that very attractive.
Understandable. So despite flicking the cig, you mentioned that, acknowledging that him being straight edge was cool, but not really your thing at the time.
No, yeah. So I was I remember I learned about straight edge like everybody else through Minor Threat. And then, so, Ian's at that SOA Black Flag show in Kensington that turned into this vicious riot. And I got hit in the face, took a punch in the face and got knocked out. And so I just, I loved the DC music, but I kind of thought the DC guys were uncool, and I wasn't, I couldn't really fathom straight edge. And so.
Did you think it was a malevolent thing at the time? the idea of straight edge because
I thought it was
experience?
like, I just thought it was like not fun. I didn't think it was, I didn't really understand it, I think,
Well, it probably sounded
Like,
like,
were they-
Catholic school and,
Yeah,
growing up.
Was it
like-
like these uptight weirdos or something?
Well, I don't know if I thought they were uptight, but they punched me in the face. So like I wasn't,
I'll do it.
I didn't really like him. But then when I kind of got to know those guys at Buff Hall, then, I saw that they were, nice and cool. And I to this day, I love Ian. He just came and visited me last month. And, they're just, they're first rate guys. But, it wasn't a requirement for me to be straight edge when I met Al. Like a lot of people, like when I post, I run the social media for SSD, and sometimes I'll, post like straight edge stuff, and then, some asshole will come on, and be like, oh, well, they were so militant, and if you weren't straight edge, they, killed anybody with a beer in their hand kind of bullshit, and I'm like, that never happened.
I'm his wife.
Yeah,
I'm not straight edge.
It just never happened. I don't know what happened to straight edge further down the line when it became all this weird no sex vegan shit, like that was not the straight edge that I knew, the straight edge that I knew. And it wasn't a requirement for me. But after I moved to Boston and, Al was really into like working out and lifting weights, and there were no girls that really lifted weights back then, but like I wanted to do it, Wow. And so I started going to World Gym with him and Nautilus Plus and places like that. And I started to get in touch with my health. And then I decided that I was going to do it because I was totally into like that aesthetic, that I wanted to 100%. Be super healthy and in good shape. And, we're in our bathing suits riding jet skis all the time and doing all this stuff. So
dream.
It was fun. And so and then I pretty much, I was pretty much straight edge ever since then. There were times with work. I worked at a law firm and stuff, and there were times but I was the kind of person that if I drank, I got a little stupid and crazy and stuff. It was never a good thing for me. So
that is interesting to me because I had a conversation with I went to the Unction the other night. I had a conversation with Carl from Earth Crisis recently about how the old guard of punk and hardcore and straight edge didn't look at it as this lifetime commitment type thing.
Right.
You have Youth of Today breaking, reclaiming, breaking. You got Ian being reluctant to embrace it at all.
Rabies often did it too.
See, was it to Al a lifetime commitment type thing?
The entire time that I knew Al, he did not drink or do drugs. But then when Al started having back surgeries, and I hope he won't be mad that I tell this story, but, he had fusions in his back surgery. So they had to give him a lot of drugs.
Of course.
And,
what are you going to do?
Yeah. And
that's like the worst surgery you could, back surgery.
Yeah. It was really, really hard. And then, I remember after he got out, like a couple months went by, and then, he was like, oh, I have the flu, and I feel really sick. And, it went on for a while. And then finally I said to him, I go, did you stop taking a pill or something? I said, because I think you're dope sick, And sure enough, the doctor had been prescribing him OxyContin, which was like brand new at the time. And he just didn't want to take it anymore. He figured he was healed, and he stopped. He just stopped at cold turkey.
Wow.
And he was sick as a dog,
Yeah, sure.
And so he had to, he had 8 back surgeries. So he had to take himself off of opiates, a lot. Wow. And he talks about that in interviews and stuff, but, and then I remember his doctor, his pain was so bad. His doctor recommended medical marijuana. And I can remember he picked me up from school one day, and he was like almost crying, telling me that, he was going to try. And I was like, Al, if this is going to give you relief where you're not suicidal, because his pain was so bad at one point he was suicidal. Yeah. I was like, take whatever you need, The
movement that he was such a big part of the spearhead of the movement of straight edge.
Right.
The man he had earned however many pounds of medical marijuana he needed.
Right. So I get, I get emails from these people in Austria or somewhere, and they're
Of
like,
course.
you know,
Had to be
was
you.
Al straight edge his whole life, you know? And I was
Yes.
like, you know, like, I don't want to speak for my husband, number one, but, you know, there's times when, you know, people may not believe it, but like you need something to get you through an operation, you know, and like,
Totally.
and so, he, you know, he never used drugs or alcohol recreationally that I ever saw, you know.
That's what we're talking
That's
about.
most important. And I mean,
Yeah.
like, whatever, you know.
Yeah.
Right,
Nancy,
right.
let me ask you. He had a particular move on stage, Al did, where he would jump and do the coolest looking jump you've ever seen. But would he land on his ass?
Yeah, he would land wherever he landed. He was like of the wrestling mindset.
I mean, that's awesome. But is that?
I mean,
is
he
that,
had as many back surgeries as Hulk Hogan.
Yeah,
Yeah,
is that
so
what led
you know,
to the?
we wonder. You know, we always wondered what, you know, he had a degenerative back
Okay.
condition.
Sure.
But you know, the jumps on stage. He was injured at GE so much. He worked for Jet. He was a mechanical engineer at GE. He tested jet engines. I remember one time a guy ran a cord along the, and he tripped. Al tripped over it. You know, and GE. They didn't want you to report accidents, you know, it was like considered a bad thing. And so, you know, he was a company, you know, he really loved working at GE, and he didn't, you know, I hate GE for that. But
Yeah.
and
me too.
I don't know if you read Al's obituary, but I gave him a little dig in his obituary. One of my friends was like, "That was a great obituary, but only you would do the punk rock thing." Is like, you know,
Bury GE on
slagging
the
a
left.
corporation in the obituary. You know,
That's awesome.
but I did because I
Good.
thought, you know, Al would be happy that I did that. You know, so he had that, and then one time I remember he was lifting weights. You know the ones where, you know, it's on like a thing, and
Yeah.
you know you're going like this,
Yeah.
Smith machine,
and he
military
had
thing?
like put it up and then leaned forward, and it landed, you know, and he was lifting a lot of, and it landed on his back.
Oh no.
One time at my house, at my parents' house, he was carrying a hot water heater for my father and hurt his back. So there was like many things that could have contributed to his
Sure.
back hurting, you know, and it was a
Sounds
shame.
like all of it.
Yeah, I
came
think it was
together.
cumulative, and you know, it makes me sad that he had to go through all that and then, you know, get cancer on top of it all. You know, it just kills me. So,
Pardon this interruption. We hate to interrupt this unbelievable episode, but it's very important, and it'll be super fast. Guys, it's officially November. You know what that means? It means it's almost December, which means it's almost Christmas, which Al Barile loves.
Oh, wow. Perfect.
So in true Barillian fashion, let's get you and your loved ones ready for Christmas over at Manscaped. We got to get your nose hairs clean. We got to get your butt hairs clean. We got to get your face hairs clean. All the hairs can be cleaned with the handyman, okay? And if you use code HardLore, you're going to get 15% off.
What else?
You hear that? And free shipping.
Now that's the big one for me, Colin. While you clean up that neck of yours, you throw free shipping on just about anything I'm going to buy it. You add 15% off on top of it?
And I'm in, man. And not only do they have the handyman that is the ultimate travel companion, they got the crop preserver. It's like a liquid talc. You get it on, you don't worry about it, you smell good all day. They got the crop reviver. You're at the gym, you're sweating for any reason. You big guy like us, where you sweat just walking around, farting, you sweat, anything, revive.
They got the lawnmower. They got the body scrub. They got the hedge trimmer. They got the weed whacker. They got it all.
Just scape your man, okay? Quit fucking around. Quit dicking around.
Escape your woman, you know?
And escape it all.
Escape
This is
it all.
not, there's no rules here, okay? Code HardLore, 15% off, free shipping right now. This episode is also brought to you by AG1 and AGZ.
Oh my God, AGZ.
We've been drinking AG1 for years now. It's the first thing we do. Cold water, 12 ounces, a little scoop of green powder. Shake it up in the little bottle that you get straight from that.
It's really nice too. It's like such a nice bottle.
That's right. It's giving you all the daily probiotics and prebiotics you need. And now they have even more. You start your day with one, you end your day with Z. AGZ. A melatonin-free nighttime mixture. You can pour it in water or milk.
Milk.
It puts you straight down, baby. And if you go to drinkag1.com/hardlore, you're going to get a free frother.
Wow.
Yeah. And like I said, Christmas is coming.
Christmas is coming. This is perfect for that stocking. This is perfect for that special someone. This is perfect maybe to send a little message to say, hey, I'm thinking about you in your guts.
That's right. Stuff this in the stocking and then stuff it down your gullet and just live a healthier life. It's a very simple change. Back to the episode.
So, around this time, if we're going back to your timeline.
I jumped way ahead.
No, you're totally fine. You eventually moved to Kenmore Square, which is very fabled.
I live like, I'm in Fenway. I'm not really Kenmore, but I'm a few blocks from Kenmore.
From Kenmore. You just had a post the other day about how that particular intersection, that square, fabled square from Negative Effect songs, and all the I know what Kenmore Square is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm not from Boston. Did you find it natural?
Yeah. So I loved it. When I moved here, I was really worried that I wasn't going to have friends, girlfriends especially. And, I didn't know. But the Boston crew, girls and guys, they just embraced me. They used to come and visit me. My apartment then was 4 blocks from where I live right now. And people would stop by and see me all the time. And they, Boston people were just so great. And that's, I met Angie, who went on to be Jamie's wife, and my girlfriend Jackie. Before I moved here, I remember she sent me a picture of Al in the mail and said, I took this picture of Al and I can't wait till you move to Boston. I didn't even know who she was, but I thought, wow, that's so cool. And Christina Lease, who went on to be an actress, who was dating Springer at the time, everybody was just so nice. I loved Boston people, and I would ride, I had a beach cruiser and I would ride my bike down to Kenmore, if no one was, and you'd always see, 3 or 4 people that you knew, and you could hang out and you'd go to Super Salad, or, it was just a cool spot to hang out. Now it's nothing like that, it's nothing. And my neighborhood, people are like, oh, it must be really nostalgic for you. No, it's not, because it's not anything like when I lived here. It was all artists and musicians and students, and the only places to eat were McDonald's and Burger King. Now there's 30 restaurants, half of them are vegan. As soon as I moved over here, I went vegan, and it's just, it's a completely different place, and I think that's kind of good, because I think it would be too sad if it was just So
Beautiful.
And when you moved to Boston, so the book is called "I'm Not Holding Your Coat."
Yeah.
That coat, pretty cool.
The Al coat.
The straight edge jacket.
Yeah, the straight edge jacket. Al gave that to me at the Misfits at the church show in Cambridge, December 1982. He just gave it to me. And for once in my life, I had the presence of mind to keep something, because I got rid of so much stuff. If you follow me, I gave away test pressings and I had the presence of mind to keep that jacket, and I
still have it.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
It's the one. That's the coolest thing.
It's in the closet right there.
It's the only coat you'll hold.
Yes, that's what I remember saying. I won't hold your coat, but if you give it to me as a present, I'll keep it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was, I thought that was a pretty cool thing when Al gave that to me, and I'm glad that I saved it.
I'm glad you did too. So did you, obviously the idea of girlfriends, girls at shows are holding the coats for the guys, whatever. Obviously this was something that Colin and I grew up, you'd hear about that. Obviously you were experiencing that at that age.
No, I didn't experience that at my age. That was not my experience at all. There's so much photographic evidence to back that up. If you look at the shows, in Boston or in Philly, the women are up front, we're right up front, we're doing shit, we're making shit happen. I never heard this holding my coat thing till Facebook. And that's that's when it, in 2003, 2004, around that time, guys would be saying, well, we gave our girlfriends our coats to hold, and I was like, the hell is that shit? That was not my experience.
I assumed it was a spiteful thing that you had held on to.
No, it was a spiteful thing because of the mansplainers who would attack me when I would post about shows. So like I like to post on anniversary dates, okay?
Yeah.
And I'd be in these different hardcore Facebook groups and I would be like, on this day, Minor Threat played here, and this happened. And then some dude born in the 90s would say, that's not Irving Plaza, and I'd be like, I was at the show. You weren't even there, like they would try to correct me or contradict me or refute what I'd said for shows that I actually did, and it just pissed me off so bad. The mansplaining was just, it still is, off the charts,
100%.
like, I don't know why, because the guys that I came up with in hardcore in the early 1980s were amazing. They were respectful, they were cool, they looked out for us, they didn't take shit, and they just let us live our lives, and so to have these guys like say to me, women in hardcore don't mix. That was one I got, or, some guy said to me, you just, dick road guy, I was like, what? Like it was just, it was really, it just angered me. So I figured, you know what, I'll write this book and tell my story, and then you can come at me. I don't give a shit,
Wow.
So
Beautiful.
do it. Yeah.
That is very cool to hear. You, in the book, you talk about how much you love the Bad Brains.
Yes.
But then at the same time,
It's hard.
there was an increase in their kind of like homophobic, misogynistic lyrics and mentality. And I've always wondered how punks at the time reacted to that. Because it seemed like when you talk to some people about it, they're like, it was just like kind of the way it was. When in your book is the first time I've seen actual resistance to it.
Yeah, that was the first time I had to navigate something like that as a young person, because I loved the Bad Brains. Like, I mean, I cannot even tell you how amazing they were back then. Like, there was just nothing like it. I can't even,
Yeah, you said it made all your other records feel slow.
Right? Yeah, and I just, I just thought they were great. And so I remember after the first time I saw them, I said, I'm going to see this band wherever they play in a tri-state area region for the rest, whatever. And I did. That's a promise I kept. I remember like seeing them on like a Tuesday night and getting dropped off in front of my law firm in the morning and like putting my pantyhose on in the elevator to go to work, So because I just thought they were great. But it was at that show that I went to New York with MDC, where MDC confronted, Dave from MDC confronted Daryl and about it, and that's the first time I ever heard that word bumbleclot, I didn't know what that word was before that. And so it was hard because I loved them so much and I didn't want to do it. But, the thing, and I read an interview with Daryl years later about it, the Bad Brains were by far not the only homophobic, misogynistic band out there.
It's all over.
There were a lot of them, but
Yeah.
there was some racism involved, I think, that made them be the the ones that got the most shit for it,
I see.
And so, and it almost coincided with, I think the last time I saw them when they were in their greatness, where they just blew me away, was probably 1983. So then it wasn't so hard to give them up because they were no longer what I chased that 1981, 82 high for straight through the 2000s, like hoping that I would see them and I just see a glimmer of that, but I never did, so there's, I've had guys tell me, I saw them in 1987 and they were like amazing. Well, you know what? You didn't see them the way, sorry, you just didn't see them.
You're not a quickness gal.
No, not really. It's okay. Like, it's all right. I don't hate it, but it's not what I can't even tell you. There's enough videos out there that you probably know. Like, they were just...
CBGBs 1982 is one of the greatest live sets I've ever seen.
Exactly. And I'm so glad that is on tape, and there's also the first time I saw them at the Elk Center in Philadelphia. That's on tape too. It's not as good a quality as that one with CBGBs, but I remember there were there were little kids there that night, like Zeke Zagar, who's playing with HR now, and Chuck Trees and people like that. They were just tiny little kids. And I was worried they were going to get hurt at the show, so I was keeping an eye on them, to make sure. But I remember hearing those opening notes of Big Takeover, and it was like a magnetic pull. Yeah. I was and there's pictures, a girl contacted me 7 years ago. She's like, I have pictures of you at the Bad Brains at the Elks. I was like, oh my God, send them to me. And you can just see my face is I'm on the stage practically. And I'm just the look of awe on my face just says it all. It was I was like, this band, oh my God.
You were not alone. It seemed they changed everything.
Seems like
and people told me that. People told me, they said, when you see the Bad Brains, your life will change. And it is true. It is absolutely true. And it's the Robert Frost poem, nothing gold can stay. Yep. Nothing that potent and powerful and explosive could ever last longer than the years that it did. So
very true.
I
know another band that you said had a similar experience for you was Black Flag.
Yes.
Damaged.
Yeah.
Black Flag, SOA, and the Kensington Brawl. Let's get into it.
Oh my God, that night. Yeah. So that was a crazy night. So we knew that Kensington was a dangerous place. And I had been living, I was living in Philly maybe a year or so. And so I had, my dad was a Marine, so I had street smarts, I wasn't naive or whatever, but everywhere was very dangerous back then. And I just figured it was part of the deal, And so we went down there, to see, I loved SOA. That's, I had seen Black Flag a few months before that with Dez as singer, and just
and you liked that. You were
Dez will remain my favorite singer of Black Flag.
I think most Black Flag heads, that's their opinion, is that Dez is the guy.
I like Henry too.
Sure.
I do like Henry, but I really
Damaged.
Yeah, I really did. Yeah, I really did like. I really liked Dez, but I loved SOA, and that's the main reason I went that night was to see SOA. So, we got there, and I remember meeting, people from DC. I remember there were girls there that Tony was there. She played in one of the DC bands, and Cynthia Conley was there, and Ian was there, and talking to them. And I remember Chuck Meehan, who's a Philly legend, warning the DC kids, that they weren't in Kansas, this, whatever. And so the locals came into the show, and they were starting shit in the pit, kids were, they had never seen slam dancing before, so they were jumping in the pit, and punks were giving it right back to them and everything. And then years later, when Ian and I compared notes, he was up on stage, and he saw these two young kids come in and throw punches, and then there was a lot of DC kids there that were drunk as well that night, and they went running after these kids, but Ian recognized it as a setup. He was like, this is a setup, don't do that, But it was too late. They ran outside. And so everybody ran outside, and then it was just they were out there waiting for us. And it was, everybody in the neighborhood, old men throwing rocks, little kids, everybody. And they were, they weren't playing. They had bats and lead pipes and everything. And when all the chaos ensued, I thought it was, and to this day I still thought it was a skinhead from DC who hit me in the face, and I got knocked out, but I had mace. And so I just, when I got up, I was just Mason, everybody to get out of my way so I could get the fuck out the door, Sure. Yeah. And we had taken the train there. And so I had to get on it. It was an elevated, just like the Warriors, if you've ever seen that movie.
Yeah, of course.
It was just like us running from the Turnbull ACs. It was exactly like that. And I had just seen that movie a couple years before that.
Yeah.
And I remember.
So you're running for your life, thinking,
I'm running for my life.
This is just like the Warriors.
And I was hiding between. I was hiding between two cars, waiting to hear the elevated train come because I wasn't going to run up there until it came.
Wow.
You know,
they do that in the movie.
Just like the movie.
That's amazing.
Just like the movie.
You're good.
And so, I was lucky to get out of there. And then, Ian, they got, stuck where they couldn't run back into the club. There was nowhere to go. And the cops came and, they were hitting, the cops were definitely on the county side, and then Ian goes to get in his car with Cynthia and her sister and his Duster, which he was having problems with, and turns it and it's dead. And he's like, holy shit. So now
Stuck
he's
here.
Yeah. So he says to the cops, you got to give me a jump, and they didn't want to do it, but they did. And they were able to get out of town enough that they broke down in Philly and slept in a park, but then they were able to get home. And then, John Stab tells the story, they all went to the hospital afterwards, who got stitches in their head, people got hit with bats and pipes and everything. And then he tells a story of seeing a guy in there holding his neck. And when he took his hand away from his neck, the guy had a big chunk out of his neck that he'd got in a bar fight with somebody, and the guy didn't know how to fight, so he just bit this big chunk out of his neck.
Shit.
And
That's
John ends his little thing saying, yeah, Philly's for barbarians. And so after that, I wasn't too keen on those DC guys, I thought, but when we did Buff Hall, there just had started to be just a tiny little bit of schism, not anything like, you hear about and so Allison and I and this guy named Rob, we decided to form a BYO. We borrowed from, I used to talk to Sean Stern on the phone all the time.
Sure.
And,
Hell yeah.
And we wanted to make an East Coast version of that. And he gave us his blessing, and we did. And that's why we did the Buff Hall show with Minor Threat from DC, Boston SSD, New York, and Philly to bring everybody together in a nice hardcore love fest. And then
the gathering of the tribes.
The gathering of the tribes.
That's right. That's one of my favorite
videos
is watching guys in SSD shirts, like obvious Boston guys, seeing Minor Threat play the song Straight Edge and just watching this happen.
Yeah.
And, it's one of it's.
So
it's
you
awesome.
booked that?
I booked that, with Allison and Ron Thatcher, and
didn't Ian get hit by a car? Or something?
that night. So Al, Al had a good job at GE at the time. He was a machinist before he was an engineer, and he had a nice van and he had nice equipment, that he worked very hard to get. And so when I booked this show, he said, "Don't bring me into a war zone," and I was like, "It'll be fine. It'll be fine," And so then he came and picked me at Philly to Camden is just over the bridge, like Boston, Cambridge, it's like just a ride over the bridge. And so he picked me up at my apartment, and all the Boston crew guys were in the back. And, as we're driving through Camden.
I'm sorry. I've always wondered how many could fit in that van. How many guys were back there?
Oh, back that day, 13.
Is that with equipment back there too?
That's with equipment. Yeah.
And you're sitting shotgun?
And I'm sitting shotgun.
That's right.
I think with Tony Perez was sitting next to me, sharing a chair with me.
Yeah.
As we're driving to Camden, now Camden then and now was one of the most dangerous places in the country, most violent places, but everywhere was violent. So I was jaded, and so, we're driving down the street and everything's blighted, and Al's like, "Where's this place?" So we pull up to the club. I got out to find out where to load the equipment in. And after I crossed the street, all of a sudden I heard this car come, like Ian came out and went to the driver's side window to talk to Al. And I heard this car coming down the street really fast. And I looked, and the driver had like crazy dreads, and his eyes just were like, I was like, this dude's not stopping. He's not stopping. And he hit Al's van head on, and Ian, was a skater, so he jumped. He held on to the top of Al's van and pulled himself up, and thank God he did, or he would have been dead.
Whoa.
But it clipped his sneakers off. His sneakers right off his feet. He had a big, knot on the back of his calf, on his head, and so there were some kids.
So is Al like? Does he have like a Homer Simpson moment where he's like?
Yeah.
He's like, Nancy!
No, he didn't really say anything to me because we were still in the beginning stages of love, Perfect. So he didn't really say anything to me. But, his van was so damaged that they had to lift it up and like put it over to the sidewalk. He couldn't drive it,
Oh.
And so somebody took me into the hospital, and then I go inside to find Allison, and she's sitting at the bar with like 12 of the scariest black biker dudes I ever saw. They look like something out of a comic strip, like it was. And I'm like, can I talk to you for a minute? So she comes over. I'm like, what's up? And she's like, well, kids were getting jumped and beaten up, on the way to the show. And these guys, the Ghetto Riders, they were a division of the Atlantic City Wheels of Soul. They had their clubhouse next door, and they demanded entry. And Allison was very beautiful and very charming and very smart, and she won those guys over like that. And so they put the word out on the
Ghetto Riders?
The Ghetto Riders, they were called. They still exist to this day.
Oh, all right.
Awesome.
Yeah, and the Wheels of Soul do too. So they put the word out on the street that Buff Hall was a Ghetto Riders party that night, and then the attack stopped.
Wow.
And the guys told us, they said, if you stay inside, we can protect you. But if you go outside, we can't, So at one point, it got so hot in there that I went outside. And I remember somebody threw like a big D battery at me, and it hit me right in the ribs, and I thought I got shot. I was like, it hit me so hard, I was like, oh, it took my breath away, and I was like, fuck, I got shot.
They whipped that thing.
Yeah. And then I realized, I looked down and I saw it was a battery, and then I went back inside. I didn't go out again after that. Damn. But like, then we didn't know what to do. So I think like, and there was questions about whether the show would go on, because I think some of the guys in Minor Threat were like, get in the van and go home, sure. Fuck this, But on the other hand, I think it upped the energy for every band that played that night, because that is the best hardcore show I've ever seen in my life, and I would argue that it's probably one of the top 5 of all time. Wow. That in existence.
Many agree just from seeing the video.
Yeah, I mean every band brought their A game, and even Agnostic Front was so new, and not that good, but still the energy was there, and the John Watson was singing for them back then, and it was just, and so then we had to figure out what we were going to do with Al's van, because we weren't going to leave it. It'd be stripped for parts, but in hours, So I called my dad. And I said, I called from the offices of Buff Hall, and I said, Dad, my boyfriend from Boston. He's like, your boyfriend from Boston? They didn't know what I was doing, So I said, yeah, he drove down here. He, got in an accident, and my dad was really cool. Like, my dad was tough, he was tough, but he was cool that night. He said, tow the van to our house in the suburbs, and I'll take care of it. And so I gave my keys to the crew, and somebody drove them to my little studio apartment in Philly. And Al and I rode with the tow truck driver to my parents' house, and that's, Al met my parents for the first time that night, and he had he had gone through the windshield and had like a big cut on his head, and he had a shaved head, which nobody back then had unless you were military or psycho, And so, but my parents were cool. They were nice, and they took care of
a gathering of the tribes, indeed, in more ways than one.
And so my parents took care of it, which really impressed Al. Like he was like,
her lasagna was good.
Yeah, he was like, I remember my mom gave him orange juice with ice cubes in it. And he just thought that was the weirdest thing ever,
It's a little crazy.
Yeah, it's a little weird. But she just, she knew he was, hot, and she wanted to make it, But, so, and I remember him saying, like, he knew that, that he wanted to be with me even more then, because he knew I came from good people, that were gonna, and they fixed his van. He came down a little while later and got it. And, we rode, the tow truck driver was cool. He dropped us off at my apartment, and then it was like a Boston Crew rug all over my floor. I think Al and I had to sleep in the bathtub or something. It was like, there was no room. I lived in a studio apartment, a little tiny thing. But that show was epic and remains to be one of
the
all
time.
Yeah, I would say, definitely.
Wow. You mentioned kind of being out of hardcore by 1985.
85, yeah.
Which for a lot of people, that's when
it started. I know.
88 marks this gigantic. This is like the boom. The boom begins and really never ends.
Yeah, for me, all the bands that I liked broke up, and I didn't really like any of the new ones.
Because they were new, or just because they weren't your bands?
They're just like, name a band. I just didn't like them.
Sure. Underdog.
Metallica.
Underdog. I don't think I knew Underdog then, because I heard Underdog and I thought they had like a little bit of a Bad Brain sensibility, so I did like them.
Definitely.
Okay.
But like I didn't like Slapshot.
Killing Time.
I didn't like those.
Yeah,
you
didn't like Slapshot.
No, I thought like Choke sort of took Al's persona, and I thought it was phony. I didn't like it,
You talk in the book, you talk about,
and I want to go on the record as saying that.
Yeah.
I freaking love Steve, I love Mark, and I loved Choke back then too. Like I did like those guys, but I just, I wasn't seeing it, and it seemed like hardcore was getting like kind of like aggro and stupid, and it just, I aged out, I guess, sure. Like I just didn't really like it. And then I didn't get excited about another band until Guns N' Roses came on the scene.
Hey,
and then I was a huge Guns N' Roses fan.
So would you say, I like how you're saying this, because you're saying you aged out. You don't subscribe to the idea that it died or that it ended.
No. I don't think it's ended to this day.
Look at us.
And I went to, I went to Turnstile, and like 50, when you post this, 50 million people will be on like, Turnstile's not hardcore, because, that's what happens.
They're full of shit.
Yeah, but I will tell you, I have not seen that energy since 1982, I'm watching it from, the stage, looking out at the crowd, and man, that band is good. Yes. I have not seen a band that tight. They all look like they're 15, and they're just so freaking, the drummer is like, Daniel. He had to have like drums. He had to have drums replaced during the night because he hit him so hard they freaking just disintegrated,
He's got Sam Boston working for him. Though,
right.
He's
and Meg, is like this little doll who's like so good, and she loves SSD, and she's the one that hooked it up. So anyway, the article comes out in the New Yorker. Did you guys see that?
Probably.
Yeah, now the New Yorker, as an English teacher, the New Yorker is like my, I love the New Yorker. I've been reading it for decades and everything. So to be in the New Yorker is just unbelievable. So this guy, who knows a lot about music, he wrote like, and then had like a silly title like, Hardcore's Not Mean Anymore or something. I can't remember the exact thing, but it first talks about Al and me, and it mentions my book and everything, and then it goes into Turnstile, and they interview Meg, and they use this great line where they say, like, she gives a Barillian response.
Oh.
And I just freaking love that, that my heart,
Yeah.
and it came out after Al died. So it was really special to me. So I read it, and I listened to Turnstile. I was like, oh yeah, they're pretty good. And I saw like their tiny desk thing, which I thought was amazing, but Chris Foley, who's the drummer of SSD, he went down a rabbit hole, and he just really got into Turnstile. And so he was the one, and Chris is really kind of quiet and shy, and this was definitely out of his comfort zone. But he got Meg's email and asked her for tickets, and
wow.
and that is just so not Chris. Sure. That's so not Chris. And so he had asked me, do you want to go to Turnstile? And I think tickets were like $90, and I was like, no, and then he was like, well, what if I can get tickets? And I was like, well, yeah, I'll go then.
Sure.
And so I had I talk too much, I feel like.
No, this is why we're here, Nancy.
This is for you to talk.
Yeah,
this is what we want to hear.
So as I told you, like I'm in this really cool building, it's like this bougie building, and it's really nice, and everybody's smart, and they're doctors, and they're, physical therapists and lawyers, and like, there's no Trumpers here, and it's like I'm in heaven, I'm in absolute heaven. And the people are really nice to me. I am by far the oldest person in this building, And so one night it was like game night. We're playing game night, and everybody's yelling and screaming, and it's like my turn to get the clue, and I'm like, you guys, you got to be quiet because my husband was in a punk rock band and I can't hear. And this guy that was sitting next to me was like, you like punk rock? And he's like 35, and I said, yeah, my husband's, and we start talking and everything, and he likes like Fugazi. So I'm like, I'm going to blow your mind right now. And I call up Ian's picture on our rooftop, and he's like, I can't believe like Ian was in this building, And so I didn't want to go to Turnstile. Like Chris said that he could get us tickets. We knew we had tickets. Mm-hmm. But I didn't want to go by myself. I didn't want to, go all the way to Revere and back at night,
Sure.
By myself.
Sure.
I'm just too freaking old for that, So I asked Brian, the guy that I met, I was like, hey, you want to go to Turnstile? And he was like, hell yeah,
That's incredible.
Yeah,
all
so,
right,
he and I
Brian.
went, and he's from Scranton, Pennsylvania. So he has been to shows before, but not backstage. And like that night was just every single band. Speed was amazing. Mannequin Pussy was amazing. And East Turnstile was just, we just had the best day, when we got there, we found out we had backstage passes. We didn't know that, but
Sure.
They gave it, and they treated us, they were the most down to earth, nicest people that you could ever want to meet. Like, I just can't believe how sweet they were.
And that's always been the case.
Yeah.
We have both toured with that band back when they played before both of our bands.
Wow.
Before they were the biggest band in the world, and they've not changed. They've always been the same
they were
people.
just so nice. Like I couldn't believe how nice they were. And then Atiba Jefferson was there, and like, do you know him? He's a photographer, and he did. If you've ever seen the Kobe Bryant,
Kobe, he is Kobe's
the,
guy.
Yeah, with the back to back with his daughter and everything. Like he's a big basketball, skateboard, and punk hardcore photographer.
Wow.
And so he goes by me, and he's like, Nancy Barile, big fan, and I'm like, freaking Atiba Jefferson, like, oh my God, so I could have talked that guy's ear off all night, So he's like, oh, we were ready to leave, because we didn't want to bother the band any more than we already did, but he's like, oh no, you got to come back, and so then we're like, it was so much fun. It was probably like the most fun I've had in 15 years,
You gotta keep coming.
Well,
yeah, so then
keep on coming.
Yeah.
So then Judge and that show was there, and so then I called Brian up, and I'm like, you want to go to see Judge? And he was like, yeah, hell yeah. I give him a 1-pager before we went, like, this person is here, and they played with this band, and this person is, so that he knew who everybody was before we went, and that was a great show, and Judge was amazing, and
did Judge play? Youth of Today will play Glue. Did Judge play an SSD
Judge
song?
played Judge played Boiling Point, and Mike, before he played, he said, we're going to play this song because Nancy fucking Barile is in the audience. And he said, I can't tell you what Al Barile meant to me, and I'm bawling, of course,
This is making me choke up. This is crazy.
and I was, it really meant a lot to me that he did that. So, we had a great time. I had to teach that night, because I still teach two college classes at Emmanuel College, and so I had to teach that night, so I was like, but we went over and I bought them vegan cupcakes, and and I got to see Kelly, Kelly 108 and Kate 108, and it was a really fun night. So now we're going to Impact Driver because they're from Philly, and the girl who's playing guitar for them now is a friend of mine, and so they're playing in Boston. So I'm going to see them on the 8th, I think it is, and then of course we're going to see Agnostic Front in December.
That's right.
You got to come. Well, I'm playing December the For the Children thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
you gotta
where's
come.
that at?
Somewhere.
It's in Boston.
Yeah, but when is it?
December 6th, I think, 5th and 6th.
Yeah, I might be able to do that.
Okay,
Yeah,
come on out.
Because I think they're December 4th. They're a Thursday.
Perfect.
Are you?
I think we're Sunday.
Yeah.
So then
it's not out of my price point, is it?
No, you
It will
don't have
not
a
be.
price point. I got you.
Oh, you got me? Okay, then
Come
that's
on,
good.
you know I
You got to
got
get
you.
Brian, too. You got to
No
get my
problem.
physical
I got
therapist
Brian.
friend. Okay. Yeah.
I got Brian.
You got Brian. Okay.
You're out of hardcore in 85, but what hardcore becomes 88 and on through the 90s, straight edge evolves into this completely different thing. And I know that there are
So
some
I heard.
negatives there,
Yeah.
too many.
Yeah.
But like the positives so vastly outweigh it, and the amount of people's lives it's touched. Are you proud of that? Was Al proud of that?
I mean, it's not my thing to claim. So
You're right there. You're
I
the
know,
other
but
arm
that's
of it,
that's Al, and that's
You're the better half.
I think I think Al in the book, in the SSD book, when I was interviewing Al and the band about it, I remember Al telling a story about a wrestler. What's his name? CM Punk or something like that.
A friend of the
boy.
show, CM Punk. Yep.
Yeah, saying, talking about straight edge. And that's when Al realized this is a cultural phenomenon that'll live forever. And that made him really proud. But I think what made Al proudest was emails from people that said, you saved my life, or straight edge saved my life, And I think that made him really happy that he had that alternative, because that's all he wanted was an alternative to the drinking and stuff that most high school kids go through. So
there's never a time where you're more influenced to participate in something like that. When I personally needed an outside voice to guide me. So
you guys both straight edge?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, that's awesome.
So thank you, Al.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. What I was going to ask about though was SSD put out Power. There was the hard rock thing, and no one ever really talks about that record. No one really ever talks. Well, enough said. All right, there we go.
Yeah, and that is more for me.
Wow.
So here's about Power, and it's not about the music or the record. They were getting bootlegged. Out the ass, and so, I remember when Al met up with the guys from Youth of Today, for the very first time. When he met him for the first time, that was only like 2 years ago. And, he confronted them about that because they were the ones that were supposedly had done that. The very first bootleg. They were bootlegged many times, but the very first
bootlegging,
the kids will have their say. EX claim version of the one that it wasn't X, it was EX claim. Was supposedly done by the Youth of Today guys. That was the rumor. And
so they talked about it.
They talked about that, yeah. And so the reason that they did Power, the Power record was because they wanted to stop bootleggers, because now here's all the music, and now, whatever. But working with Curtis was a huge mistake. And Curtis kept the tapes or doesn't realize that he has the tapes. I don't know what the real story is, but he doesn't have such a great reputation for treating bands or paying bands or anything like that, you know?
Understood.
And so that sort of left a bad taste in both my mouth and Al's mouth, you know, where
Okay.
we were really, you know, we asked for, when Trust was going to do the records, we didn't see any money from Power, you know. I think he sent right when we were starting to talk to Trust, he sent $1,000 checks to everybody in the band, and Al wouldn't cash his because he was like, this is gonna make him think that he has the rights to this record, and he doesn't, you know.
Oh, wow.
And so he wouldn't return those tapes. And I even reached out to him and I said, listen, you know, Al's sick, you know, like we want this record to come out. Give us the tapes back, you know, and he wouldn't.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe he doesn't realize he still has them. Who the hell knows? I don't know. But I thought it was pretty shitty, you know.
Understood.
So that's why it left a bad taste in my mouth,
Understood.
the Power record, you know. So I was just so pumped that, you know, and a lot of people had wanted to do the records, you know, like over the years. But Al was very discerning. And I'm really glad that he was, because he picked the right people to put this record out. I could not be happier than working with Trust Records. Like, they are
Incredible,
Joe
incredible
Nelson,
organization.
Matt, they are straight up good human beings, you know.
Right.
And Joe has been very, very good to me. He got my niece and I good tickets to see Rage Against the Machine. Okay. He got Norman Reedus to talk to my Walking Dead class.
Hell yeah.
You know,
Wow.
You have a class about Walking Dead?
I do. Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's another whole, like, it's 9, 10,
hours.
you know, like, yeah. Yeah, and we had Zoomed with Shane, if you know the characters, John Bernthal from Punisher.
That's my favorite character, is John Bernthal's character. He's unbelievable.
Yeah, so we had gotten him and Zoomed with him during hybrid COVID, where I had like kids on my screen and kids in the class. I don't know how we did it, you know. That was insane.
I mean, it's a miracle.
It's a miracle. Yeah, it was crazy, but we had Zoomed with him, and that was really cool. And he gave us some inside baseball about the show, and it was really neat. But every kid that took the class loved Daryl Dixon, like his trajectory from the racist, you know, kind of punk that he was to being a valuable and contributing member to the group and everything was just something that my students really connected with. And I know that dude liked punk rock, you know. I know he liked hardcore. He was, you know, he had Minor Threat shirts. And one time I saw an interview with him with like a little kid, and he said, like, yeah, Ian sends me records. So I call Ian and I'm like, yo, you know Norman Reedus? And he's like, no, I don't know that dude, you know. Like, and
so he buys stuff from Discord.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know.
Me too, Norman.
And then one time, Paris Mayhew posted a picture of him with Norman Reedus. So I reached out to Paris and I was like, yo, you know Norman Reedus? You know, send him. I wrote an article about the class for Huffington Post, and he sent it to Norman, and Norman retweeted it, and like it, you know, blew up really big. But I just wanted him to Zoom with the class, and I just couldn't seem to make it happen. And I hate that, because I always make shit happen, you know, and my kids count on me for that. So 7 days before I retired, Joe Nelson got Norman Reedus to Zoom with my class. Wow. And so it was like the most epic mic drop walking out the door, you know, like, see you later.
I'm out of here.
Yeah, you go.
I'm the GOAT.
Yeah, I am the GOAT. Yeah, I got Norman Reedus.
You could not have gotten out of teaching at a better time.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
Wow.
Yeah, it's bad.
Post-COVID, AI,
everything.
phones,
God.
it's over.
Yeah, it's, you know,
education's over.
Yeah, my school, you know, they didn't really have an attendance policy, and they didn't want to read whole books anymore. And that was really went fundamentally against my educational philosophy. And I just was like, I left a little early, but thank God I did, because Al and I got to spend some good quality time together before he got, you know, really, you know, sick. And then, you know, we had like 9-10 months together that we just had like second honeymoon, you know, like right after I retired, he almost died right then. He had a bowel obstruction and he could not eat or drink for 2 months. He could not even have so much as an ice chip. It was awful. It was terrible. And he was in the hospital for over a month. Wow. And then this doctor, this brilliant, amazing doctor, did a surgery on him. And then he was fine. He could eat again. Oh, and so what was
the first thing he ate, Nancy? What was the first
pasta? Yeah, pasta. Yeah. And
Barile.
Yeah.
Barile.
Yeah. And so we went to Italy and Boston and stuff. Yeah. And our eating habits were bad and probably contributory, Sure. And that's why once I moved over here and left to my own devices, I went vegan, and, Glenn Friedman's coaching me. Yeah, we were able to have some time together. So I retired at a really good time, but I'm glad to be out. Like, I still have a lot of friends teaching, and, they just tell me these stories, and I'm like, oh my God, I couldn't do it. I never had, any problems with kids. All my problems were with the adults. Sure. The kids were great. Sense. The kids had me howling. They were just amazing. So
they'll get you, man.
Yeah, they're
the realest people in your life.
They are. Yeah, yeah. So the best.
Nancy, let me ask you. We're fast forwarding a little bit. I had the opportunity. I spoke with Al a little bit over Twitter. A couple times over the span of a few months. He was sick. But we spoke. He told me he liked this podcast specifically, and that he had checked it out, which meant a lot to both of us.
Yep.
And he sent me a book, and I've always wondered, and I want you to be brutally honest with me. Did you write the like glue, like crew part?
No, that's Al.
That's all him.
Yeah, that's all him.
Well, that
every time before he would write it, he would have to think which one came first. Like glue, like crew, like glue, like glue.
That's incredible.
Well, that's beautiful.
Yeah, that's straight up Al's chicken scrawl,
Yeah, but I'm very grateful to have gotten even a little bit, and obviously had things turned out differently, we would have loved to have him on both of you on, honestly, for the opportunity of that. So
then he would have loved it. He was very podcast shy, sure. And he would like a lot of anxiety before he had, the things. And then I was not allowed to be anywhere near the room.
I was going to ask, our friend Pat from Have Heart had him on.
Yes.
In an in-person interview. You weren't present for that?
It was the Trust Records. It was on the Trust Records channel, right?
He was a natural on that. He was great.
Interview.
Yeah, but I would always be like, teasing him. Like, I'd be like, you're going to be doing it, and I'm going to be like, this, and he's like, get in the other room.
I do think it's important to note, just to say to you that, like, to us, Al's legacy not only is the incredible music he made, straight edge, but like his kindness and warmth to the generations that came after is immediately struck us and impacted us. So.
Yeah, and I think social media allowed him to show that side of him that people didn't, a lot of people had strong opinions about Al, but they didn't know him.
Sure.
And through social media, people got to see how caring and kind he was, and also how freaking weirdly funny he was.
He was very funny.
Oh my God, like, I still have his phone, and so I'm trying to go through it to like delete stuff so that I can download it. And I mean, he just put his face on everyone and everything, and it's hilarious. And he was just like that's what made our marriage, I think, so good for 43 years, was that he just cracked me up. We cracked each other up. Like, he was hilarious, Are you guys on Facebook?
Yeah.
Very little. I try not to be.
But
it's a dark place. Tell more of the stories about Al on Facebook than I do on Instagram.
Sure.
But yesterday I posted like a memory of Al where he said he had called me at work, and he said, I'm in so much traffic. I knew I shouldn't have listened to you about this. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm at work. And he's like, I heard you in my head telling me to go this way.
That's good.
And there was another time. There was another time where he came to pick me up at work, and he was on the phone with his doctor at the time. This is pre-cancer, but post back surgeries. And so he was on the phone with his doctor, and we had our dog Flippy. And Flippy was sitting on the passenger side. So he, stopped in front of the school, and I opened the door and I threw my bags in, and I realized I forgot something. And so I said, I got to go back inside and get something. And I closed the door and I went inside to get it. And when I came out, he was gone. And so I was like, what the hell? Did a cop come and make him leave? Like, where the hell did he go? And so I was just kind of standing there. And then all of a sudden he came bombing around the corner, like at a high speed. And he was like, oh my God, thank God you're here. He goes, I got halfway home and looked over and you weren't there. And I thought you fell out and I ran over you. So he's just like, there was just nobody like him, He was just funny. Even when he was like on his literal deathbed, I had said to him, and I don't want to start crying, but I had said to him, Al, come back with Flippy and see me in my dreams, come back and see me. And he said, he's like laying there and he's just like, yeah, I don't know if I can do that. I was like, well, try,
Come on, Al.
He's like, yeah, I don't know how to do that. I don't know, and I'm like, well, figure it out, and come back and visit me,
That's beautiful.
Well, yeah. I hope the stories and the people like us who told you what an impact you and him have had on all of us, I hope that is a little bit of him visiting you.
It absolutely is. And he does visit me, like I got some unbelievable signs that are indisputable. That
talk to me.
You want to know them? Okay, but like they're weird. They're weird. And like, let me just tell you, like, I am a very black and white person. I don't believe in that stuff, that much. Maybe as I got a little older, I started maybe thinking that there was a little more to it. But I'm not I smelled her perfume or the lights flickered. Like, that's not who I am. But after my parents died, where I grew up in the suburbs, we had a lot of those mourning doves, those doves that make that like weird sound. Okay. And I never saw mourning doves in Boston. We lived right on the ocean. They don't, they're not like ocean birds, but we have seagulls,
Sure.
But right after my mother was already dead and my father died, I started seeing these two little mourning doves and hearing them right outside my house all the time. And so my nephew came to visit me in the dead of winter, and we went out back, like right where the ocean is. And those two birds were in like a planter in the dead of winter. And so I was like, that's mom and dad. That's mom and dad. So when Al died, maybe 2 or 3 days after he died, I looked out on the balcony that overlooked the ocean, and there was the most giant mourning dove you have ever seen in your life. And they're not big birds.
Arms.
It was huge. It was jacked. It was, what do my students call it? They have a name for it. I can't remember what it is. They're like, but he, this was a big ass.
A Barillian.
The Barillian
bird.
Yeah, yes, it was a Barillian bird. And I looked at it and I said, that's freaking Al. So I said, if you're Al, look at me. And it turned around and looked me right in the eye. I took a picture of it.
Wow.
So I was like, oh my God. So that made me feel really good. So now I move here to Boston, and I'm 6 floors up, okay? And I'm in the city. And the very first day, the day after I move in, I'm like futzing around the house, and I hear a mourning dove, and it sounds like it's in the house with me. And I'm like, there's no way there's a mourning dove here. There's no way that it's up here 6 floors. So I'm running from room to room trying to figure out where it is. And it was right in my living room, right on my windowsill. The big jacked mourning dove again. Diesel, that was what my kids will say. The diesel, Barillian. And it was huge.
Yes.
And it was, facing outward, And so I said, if you're Al, look at me. And it turned around and looked me right in the eye.
No kidding.
And I snapped its picture, and my best friend blew it up and put it in a frame for me. There's no way you can tell me that wasn't Al.
Do you
Unbelievable.
Do you think it was the same bird in both ones?
It looked like the same bird.
looked
If
like
I
the same
showed
one. Wow.
you, if I
Yeah,
sent you tomorrow in an email the two pictures, you'd be like, it's an unusually large bird. They're just not that big, And the fact that I said, look at me both times, and it like completely turned its head around and looked at me, makes me think that was,
He figured it out.
Yeah.
He figured it out.
Yeah.
He's got to get flippy in
He
there,
always
but
does.
he figured it out.
Exactly. And I've had some dreams and stuff, and
Sure,
there's been like weird signs. Like there was nobody that loved Christmas more than Al, even
See, this is
as
my
a
guy.
63-year-old man, he would put up like giant Grinch balloons in front of our house. Even when we lived in an apartment, he had it on the balcony, big Homer Simpson Santa and a big Grinch. And I remember one of my students was like, "That was your house, Barile? My parents used to drive me down to look at that when I was a little kid."
Wow.
Yeah.
The king of Christmas.
Yeah, he loved Christmas. And so I still go to the hairdresser out in Revere. And so the last time I went and called, I never got a driver's license. And so I called an Uber to pick me up, and I got in the Uber, and in the back of the Uber, there was a Grinch on the floor. Too random not to be a sign.
He put that there.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Nancy, we cannot thank you enough for joining us today.
I hope
I have one more. I got one more.
Oh,
Yeah,
please,
go ahead.
Hit me.
In the American hardcore documentary, Al is in a studio, it looks like, and
that's his mother's basement. He turned it into a studio. Yeah.
Perfect. Were you there?
Yep.
During the film?
Yep.
Okay,
You can see me. I'm in it because I'm the one that when the doorbell rings, I go up and I answer it, and I tell him it's Springer.
I have wondered that since that documentary came out, if that was you, because his reaction is so good.
Yeah. And that kind of, I remember being a little bit upset about that movie because I thought they were there when they interviewed me that they were going to ask me about Philly and the roots of hardcore in Philly, which, I was part of,
Of course.
and they were just talking to me as the wife of somebody, but again, they could not be expected to know all the excruciating minutia of every single city, but I thought they did Philly kind of dirty, in their
But your book exists now.
Yes, and that's one of the things. And do you know who Mike Gitter is? Do you know Mike Gitter?
Of course.
Yeah,
Yes,
And Mike Gitter came and visited us one time, and he said something to me that made me so happy. He told me that after my book came out, the Philly bands, they started tracking, like people started getting their records and stuff. And that made me so happy because, Philly was a scrappy city and people did not have money the way some bands did in other cities, like they didn't have money for records. They didn't have money for vans and stuff like that. And so, they weren't out there as much and so the fact that some of these bands are, getting, and Joe Nelson told me, and now that I'm saying it in your show, he's going to have to follow through, that he's going to do like a Philly compilation, a Philly movie, a Philly, because Philly was like, some really, if you read my book, like some crazy shit happened in Philly that was just Philly was a stop for almost every band, and when they did, it was always a story. So
incredible. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. Thank you.
You may have felt like you left this community in 1985, but
I'm back. I'm back.
You're fully back. We welcome you.
You're
And
welcome.
and I have to say, the punk rock community is so freaking good to me. Like I could not have I would have jumped in the ocean, if not for my friends. Almost all my friends, except a handful are punk rock people. My best friend isn't, two of my best friends aren't, but most of them came from punk rock and they're there for me. Like Jamie and Angie and Jackie, and they're just Bridget and Mary. They're just, they're all still there for me. Even Anastas checks in with me.
It's good to know that Jamie's a good guy because every picture,
the best guy.
Every picture you ever see of him, he's smiling and just having the best time of his life. And I want that guy to be a good guy.
He is the best guy. I got him a job teaching at my school.
Perfect.
So he's he teaches with me, and he is You know, you couldn't get better people than him and his wife. They are just amazing, amazing human beings.
Love to hear it.
Much like you, Nancy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Nancy,
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for taking your
Thank
time.
you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I'll let you know the fallout when I post it in the hardcore groups.
Yeah, no, we got you. I'm Not Holding Your Coat is out now. You can get it physically. You can get it digitally.
Yep.
Maybe we'll get an audiobook going, huh? Nancy?
Right, and we need those. We still have some of the SSD How Much Art books left. A handful of those are left, and then My Adventures of a Punk Rock Teacher's coming out hopefully next year. Yeah, there it is.
Got it.
And that's funny. So it's
amazing.
funny that you showed the handwriting of Al.
Yeah.
Because Chris Minicucci and I wanted Al handwriting for the "Can You Take" in the cover.
Yeah.
And you know but Al was like, no, I don't want that because my handwriting sucks. And so you know we did a similar thing to
looks
Al.
great.
Yeah,
It's great.
Thank you so much,
All
Nancy.
right.
We hope you all enjoy this as much as we have. Truly an unbelievable conversation with a legend, a pioneer.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. When will this be up?
This will be up November 13th, I think.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that
All
sounds
right.
right.
Thank you so much for having me. Keep in touch and hit me up about that show because I'm coming.
I got you. I'm going to send it to you right now.
Yeah,
no
I'm coming
problem.
to that. Yeah. All right. Have fun. Bye, guys. Bye, you guys.
Thank you all for watching. See you
All right,
next
bye-bye.
week. Bye. This episode is brought to you by Mad Vintage.